Welcome to this presentation on the history of Weybridge, dating from the findings of Iron Age implements through to the finding of Roman coins, the Tudor period, and finally finishing up with the 20th century history. To demonstrate the richness of our history, I have selected 10 buildings in the locality that I trust you will find interesting, and also a number of well-known and lesser-known landmarks. The area of Thames Street, Monument Hill and Grotto Road is particularly interesting from an historical perspective. Within this small area you'll find the location of the original manor house, which was replaced by Oatlands Palace, and which in turn was subsequently destroyed in the Civil War. You'll see the location of the Ship Inn, the monument to the Duchess of York, the house of the writer E.M. Forster at the turn of the century, and further down Thames Street, the pillars to Portmore Park. Oatlands Palace is a former Tudor and Stuart royal palace which took the place of the former manor of the village of Oatlands. Little remains of the original building, so excavations of the palace took place in 1964 to rediscover its extent. Much of the foundation stone for the palace came from Chertsey Abbey, which fell into ruins after the dissolution of the monasteries. Henry VIII acquired the house in 1538 and rebuilt it for Anne of Cleves. The palace was built around 3 main adjoining quadrangular courtyards covering 14 hectares and utilising an existing 15th century moated manor house. He married Catherine Howard in the palace on the 28th of July 1540. It subsequently became the residence at various times of Mary I, Elizabeth I, James I and Charles I. It was to Oatlands that Mary Tudor retreated after her supposed pregnancy. Her previous residence, Hampton Court Palace, had housed the nursery staff that was assembled for the birth of the child. The announcement of a movement to Oatlands ended any hope of a happy outcome of the Queen's pregnancy. James I's wife, Anne of Denmark, employed Inigo Jones to design an ornamental gateway from the Privy Garden to the park. In 1646 it was a temporary home of the infant Princess Henrietta of England, daughter of Charles I of England, and later Duchess of Orleans, sister-in-law of Louis XIV. Whose governess smuggled her into France in the summer of 1646. The artist's impression shown on the left is of the palace after being rebuilt in 1538 on the site of the old manor house. The image on the right gives more detail of the buildings but excludes the tennis courts just outside the palace grounds. Otelands Park is originally an old hunting lodge in the grounds of the palace. The latest renaissance of the building takes its inspiration from the design of Osborne House, the home of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, located at Cowes on the Isle of Wight. The grotto contained 3 apartments connected by a winding arched passage. The sides and roof were encrusted with shells and petrifications. One of the apartments was filled with a bath supplied by a small spring dripping through the rock. At the end of the bath was a copy of the Venus de Medici as if going to bathe. There were also circular stained glass windows encircled by garter and motto, and the exterior of the grotto was formed by a whitish stone full of perforations. The Wey Canal was built by Sir Richard Weston beginning in 1635. Originally, the Wey navigations were used for transporting barge loads of heavy goods to London, timber, corn, flour, wood and gunpowder from the Chilworth mills, while coal was brought back principally for gunpowder making and smithery. From 1900 to 1963, the Wey Navigation was owned by the Stevens family, who were commercial carriers on the canal. For a variety of reasons, in 1964, Harry Stevens denoted it to the National Trust. The three mill buildings were a mixture of industrial mill, foundry and accommodation for 207 years. They are now apartments but include a heritage section left untouched. The industrial importance is shown by the closure in 1983, making Coxes Mill the last commercially operated mill in Surrey. The mill was powered by the water wheel. The unusually large mill pond was dug to overcome fluctuating water levels caused by the operation of the lock and mill stream. New machinery technology and powerful engines saw the demise of the water power at the mill, when power sources switched at first to steam and lastly to electricity. By the mid-1960s, a great wheat silo standing 130 feet high had been constructed, with a further flour silo erected in 1969. Brooklands House was built to the design of Sir Arthur Blomfield for the Honourable Peter Lock King in 1861. Hugh Lock King's most important development, and one which was to have unforeseen and far-reaching consequences, was Brooklands Racetrack, an indulgence of his own enthusiasm for the newfangled motor car. He built the track on a stretch of marshy, rough shooting land straddling the River Wey, known as Wintersell's Farm, where he had previously bred prize-winning Jersey cattle, which produced the best milk in the district. Built at a cost of over £150,000 and opened on the 8th of July 1907, the track was regarded locally as a most unpopular innovation. During the First World War, the Brooklands track was taken over solely for testing military vehicles and for aircraft production. However, after the war ended, racing restarted, and during the 1920s and 30s, Brooklands was as much part of the London summer season as Wimbledon, Henley, the Chelsea Flower Show and Royal Ascot. As well as for motor racing, Brooklands is justifiably described as the birthplace of Britain's aircraft industry. Hugh Lock King having given pioneers like A.V. Rowe, Tommy Sopwith and Bolero their first real chance, and Brooklands became the main national centre for aircraft production during World War I. In 1915, the aviation pioneering company Vickers Aviation moved its rudimentary aircraft manufacturing business to Brooklands. It was the Brooklands-built Vickers Vimy that made the first non-stop crossing of the Atlantic in 1919. In 1935, the prototype Hawker Hurricane of World War II fame made its maiden flight also at Brooklands, as did the Vickers Wellington basket weave bomber the following year. The world's first purpose-built motor circuit, constructed in Weybridge by wealthy landowner Hugh Lock King in 1907, was more than a great sporting arena. Brooklands is the birthplace of British motorsport and aviation, the home of Concorde and the site of many engineering and technological achievements throughout 8 decades of the 20th century. The museum displays a wide range of Brooklands-related motoring and aviation exhibits, ranging from giant racing cars such as the 24-litre Napier Railton to a unique collection of Vickers BAC-built aircraft. There may have been a church on the site of St James's for over 1,000 years. The monks of Chertsey Abbey, which was founded in 675, were responsible for looking after the bridge over the River Wey, and it is possible that they built a chapel here for the benefit of travellers along the road. The first certain reference to a church in Weybridge comes in 1175. Chertsey Abbey continued to look after Weybridge Church until 1288, when they passed it to the new monastery at Newark, about 8 miles south of Weybridge. The old church, which was sometimes known as St James's and sometimes as St Nicholas, was partly Norman, with additional buildings added later. However, in 1846, as Weybridge was growing and developing, William Giffard arrived as rector. He was a young, active, hired churchman, and together with a group of local people raised money to build a new, grander church. They employed John Loughborough Pearson, who went on to build many famous churches, including Truro Cathedral, as the architect. The new St James's opened in 1848, and the old church, which stood a few yards away in the graveyard, was demolished. On the penultimate slide, I've shown a small number of the multitude of interesting landmarks that you can find throughout the town. Thank you for attending this talk on the history of Weybridge. I hope it has highlighted the richness of our history and encouraged you to visit the wide range of historical buildings and locations found throughout the town.